As a man of faith, I expected everything in my life to be moving as I wanted. But I got it all wrong when it came to who I was going to marry. I still remember the day I first laid eyes on Ruth. She had walked into my church, her presence both quiet and captivating. There was a certain sadness in her eyes, something hidden beneath the surface, but I mistook it for humility. She sat in the last pew, listening to my sermon with an intensity one had never seen before. After the service, she lingered near the door, hesitating as if deciding whether to approach me. When she finally did, her voice was soft, almost fragile. "Pastor Evans," she had said, clasping her hands nervously. That was a powerful message. I think I need to find my way back to God." Those words touched me in a way I could not explain. As a man of faith, I had always believed in redemption, in God's ability to wash away even the deepest stains of the past. I saw Ruth as a lost soul seeking salvation, and I felt drawn to her, not just as her pastor, but as a man. Our courtship was brief, and some in my congregation questioned the speed of our engagement. But I ignored the whispers. Love, after all, does not operate on human timelines. We were married in a simple yet beautiful ceremony, and for 3 months, I lived in the glow of what I believed was divine providence. Ruth was everything I had prayed for in a wife: gentle, supportive, eager to be a part of my ministry. I had never been happier. Until that night. It was late, nearly midnight, when I found her sitting at the edge of our bed, her shoulders trembling. At first, I thought she was praying, but as I drew closer, I saw the tears streaming down her face. "Ruth?" I knelt beside her, gently touching her arm. "What's wrong?" She turned to me, eyes filled with sorrow. "Daniel, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you before we got married." A cold sensation crawled up my spine. "What is it?" She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Before I met you, before I came to your church, I was a prostitute for 4 years." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, my hands suddenly clammy. I wanted to speak, but my tongue felt heavy, unable to form the words. She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I was young, desperate. I had no other way to survive, and I hated myself for it. "That's why I came to your church. I wanted to change. I wanted to be worthy of something better." My mind raced. 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 emotions clashed within me. The woman I had married, the woman I had called my wife, had spent years selling herself to men. My stomach churned. But then, another voice, quieter but firmer, spoke in my heart. "Grace, Daniel, grace." Was this not the very thing I had preached for years? That no sin was too great for God's mercy? That redemption was real? I reached for her hands, feeling them tremble. "Ruth, I won't lie to you. This is difficult for me to hear. But I married you because I love you, and that doesn't change overnight. The past is the past. If God has forgiven you, who am I to hold it against you?" Her sobs grew louder, and she threw herself into my arms. "I was so scared to tell you. I thought you would leave me." I stroked her hair, whispering reassurances. "We will get through this together. You are my wife, and I will stand by you." She pulled away just slightly, her lips quivering as she whispered, "Thank you, Daniel. You don't know what this means to me." At that moment, I believed her. I believed that she was a woman who had made mistakes and wanted to leave them behind. I had no idea how wrong I was. As I held her that night, I did not see the phone on the nightstand. I did not see the message she sent as I drifted into uneasy sleep. He bought it. At first, I convinced myself that things would be fine, that I had done the right thing. Forgiveness is a cornerstone of faith, and I had extended it to my wife in the most profound way possible. But what I didn't realize then was that forgiveness is one thing, trust is another. The first signs were subtle. It began with phone calls that ended the moment I walked into the room. Conversations spoken in hushed tones, cut short with a forced smile. "Oh, it was just an old friend," Ruth would say. I wanted to believe her, So I did. Then came the late nights. At first, she would go to bed with me, resting her head against my shoulder as she always had. But sometime in the dead of night, I'd stir and feel the emptiness beside me. I'd find her sitting on the couch in the living room, staring at her phone, sometimes typing, sometimes just waiting for something. Couldn't sleep? I asked once, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. She jumped, startled, and quickly turned her phone face down. "Yeah," she said. "Just restless, that's all." It was a small thing, a small lie. And yet, a whisper of doubt settled into my chest. Then the money started disappearing. We had a joint account, an agreement we made as husband and wife to share everything. But one evening, while paying some church expenses, I noticed a large sum missing. $5,000 withdrawn in cash. When I confronted Ruth about it, she barely looked up from her cup of tea. "Oh, that," she said. "I just sent some money to my cousin. She's struggling right now." I frowned. "Which cousin?" She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Sarah, you haven't met her." Something didn't sit right, but I told myself that I was overthinking things. Marriage requires trust. I had promised to forgive her past, and that meant not questioning her at every turn. But then, a conversation with a church member changed everything. After service one Sunday, Sister Agnes, a kind but sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, approached me with a hesitant expression. "Pastor, I hope you don't mind me saying this," she began carefully. "But I saw your wife the other night, and I thought it was strange." I stiffened. "Strange how?" "Well," she sighed, lowering her voice. "I was passing through Brookline Avenue on my way home. You know, the part of town where—" She hesitated, then leaned in. "Where the wrong sort of people gather at night. And I saw Ruth getting into a car with a man. It didn't look right." I felt a chill. Brookline Avenue. That part of town was notorious. I swallowed hard and forced a smile. "Thank you, Sister Agnes. I'll talk to her." That night, I tried to brush off the warning. But when Ruth came home, late again, I found myself watching her differently. The way she avoided my gaze. The way she casually dropped her purse on the table, almost as if she didn't want me near it. When she stepped into the bathroom, I reached for her purse, my hands trembling. I knew it was wrong, but something in my gut told me I needed to look. Inside, beneath her makeup bag and wallet, I found a small, crumpled receipt. My breath caught. Regal Hotel, room 306. Paid in cash. My chest tightened. A hotel? Paid in cash. My mind reeled with excuses. Maybe she met a friend there. Maybe she booked a room for a church member in need. Maybe. But deep down, I knew. I folded the receipt, slipped it into my pocket, and steadied myself. I needed to see it with my own eyes. That Friday, Ruth told me she was going to visit a sick friend. I simply nodded, keeping my expression neutral. An hour later, I followed her. My car trailed hers at a distance as she drove across town. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. She didn't go to a friend's house. She went straight to Regal Hotel. My pulse pounded in my ears as I watched her step inside, adjusting her hair as she disappeared through the glass doors. I sat in my car, my heart slamming against my ribs. Part of me wanted to turn away, to pretend I never saw anything. But the other part, the part that knew I had to face the truth, forced my legs to move. I entered the hotel lobby, keeping my head down. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I walked past. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. Room 306. I stopped outside the door, my breath shallow. Muffled voices came from inside. A man's laugh. Ruth's voice, playful, teasing. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I stared at the numbers on the door, willing them to change, wishing this was all a mistake. Then, without giving myself time to hesitate, I knocked. Silence. Then quick movement. A whisper. The door cracked open, just slightly, and I saw his face first. A man, tall, well-dressed, younger than me. And then, behind him, Ruth. Her eyes locked onto mine. For a split second, I expected shock, guilt, fear, but instead, she simply tilted her head, her lips curling into the faintest hint of a smirk. She wasn't surprised at all. I stood in the doorway of that hotel room, feeling like the ground beneath me had cracked open. The man, barely dressed, shifted uncomfortably, but Ruth just stood there, calm, unbothered. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My mouth felt dry, my chest tight. This, I finally whispered, this is what you've been doing. She sighed as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Daniel, she said smoothly, stepping past the other man, you didn't really think I could be that woman you wanted, did you? I clenched my fists. I forgave you. I believed in you. She smiled, tilting her head. I know. That was the fun part. I didn't hear anything else. I turned and walked away, my pulse pounding in my ears. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, my mind a battlefield of anger, grief, and betrayal. But one thing was clear. There was no saving this marriage. No amount of forgiveness could fix this. By morning, I had made my decision. I handed Ruth the divorce papers that evening. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She barely even blinked. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and smirked. You'll regret this, she said simply. I felt a chill creep down my spine, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. It's over, Ruth, I said. You made your choice. She exhaled slowly, looking at the papers as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience. Then, without another word, she stood, grabbed her purse, and walked out of my life. Or so I thought. The first letter arrived at my office a week later. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary envelope. No return address. My name typed neatly on the front. But when I opened it, my stomach clenched. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence. Does your congregation know what happened in Georgia? My hands trembled as I reread the words. Georgia. No one knew about Georgia. Years ago, long before I became a pastor, I had been involved in a terrible incident, one I had done everything to leave in the past. It wasn't a crime, but it was something that, if twisted the wrong way, could destroy my reputation. Only two people in my life had ever known. My best friend, Mark, and Ruth. I crushed the letter in my fist, my pulse racing. This was her. It had to be. But what was she playing at? I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was an empty threat. But then, the second letter came. This time, it was worse. A photo of me, taken from outside my home, accompanied by a note. You look so alone, Daniel. Missing me yet? A sick feeling crawled through me. Someone had been watching me. And then, the real chaos began. One morning, I arrived at church to find my secretary, Martha, in distress. Pastor, she called, rushing toward me. Something's wrong with the church accounts. I followed her into the office, where she pointed at the computer screen. The numbers didn't make sense. Thousands of dollars missing from our donation funds. How is this possible? I muttered. The system says you authorized the withdrawals. I froze. No. That was impossible. I had never touched those funds outside of church business. That can't be right, I said. Martha hesitated. Daniel, there are emails from your account authorizing these transfers. I felt my stomach drop. Someone had hacked into my church records. Someone was trying to frame me. And I knew exactly who. The rumors started soon after. It began with whispers among the congregation. Then, the questions came. Pastor, is it true? Did you really? How could you do this? I didn't understand until I overheard two members speaking after service. Can you believe it? Our pastor, cheating on his wife. My heart nearly stopped. I stepped forward. Excuse me? They froze, looking guilty. Pastor, we just heard some things. What things? I demanded. One of them hesitated, then muttered, that you were the one cheating. That Ruth caught you. That's why she left. My vision blurred with rage. Ruth had flipped the story. She had made herself the victim. And now, my church, my family, was beginning to doubt me. The final warning came in the most terrifying way possible. I was driving down the highway late one night, exhausted from a long meeting. My mind was weighed down with everything. Ruth, the letters, the missing money, the rumors. I barely noticed the car behind me, following just a little too closely. Then, as I pressed the brakes to slow down for an exit ramp, nothing happened. My foot slammed against the pedal. The car didn't respond. The highway curved sharply ahead. My hands clenched the wheel as panic surged through me. I yanked the emergency brake just in time, my tires screeching as the car veered off the road, narrowly missing the concrete barrier. I sat there, shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. It took me several minutes before I could move again. When I finally stepped out and examined my car, my blood ran cold. The brake lines had been cut. This wasn't just about ruining my life anymore. Someone wanted me dead. I had to know the truth, not the version Ruth had spoon-fed me, not the carefully packaged story of a lost woman who had turned her life around. I needed the real truth, the one hidden beneath her tears, her smirks, and the carefully timed manipulation that had turned my life upside down. Ruth wasn't just a cheating wife. She was something much worse. And if I didn't figure out what, I might not survive whatever she had planned next. I started with what I knew. Ruth had worked as a prostitute for 4 years before we married, but I had never asked for details. Maybe I hadn't wanted to know. I regretted that now. Using the church computer, since my personal devices had been compromised, I began searching through old records, local news archives, anything that could lead me to the people Ruth had been involved with. I typed in her maiden name, her previous addresses, even the cities she had lived in before we met. At first, nothing substantial came up. Just common addresses, old job applications, standard documents. But then, I stumbled upon something chilling. An escort service. Not just any escort service. An elite, underground ring catering to politicians, businessmen, and even law enforcement officers. The name of the agency? Black Velvet. My stomach turned. This wasn't just about Ruth making a living before she met me. This was about power, secrets, and the kind of men who would kill to keep their skeletons in the closet. And Ruth, she had been right in the middle of it. I needed more. I remembered a name Ruth had mentioned in passing months ago. A woman she used to work with named Veronica. I found her through a social media account linked to a club in a nearby city. She hadn't posted in months, but there was an address listed for a small bar downtown. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I didn't belong. The dim lights, the thick scent of cigarette smoke, the low murmur of hushed conversations. This was not a place for a pastor. A woman sat at the end of the bar, her long red nails tapping against her glass. She looked older than Ruth, but had the same sharpness in her eyes. "Veronica?" I asked. She looked me up and down, then smirked. "You must be the husband." I tensed. "How did you?" "Ruth told me about you," she said. "Said you were her little project. A test to see if she could pull off the ultimate act." I swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" Veronica leaned in. "It means your wife is a player, Pastor. And you? You were her final piece." Over the next hour, Veronica laid it all out. Ruth had never left her old life. She had simply changed the game. She had worked her way into my world on purpose. Carefully, strategically. She had studied me, learned my weaknesses, and made sure she became exactly the woman I would fall for. "You were never the prize, sweetheart," Veronica said, stirring her drink. "You were the experiment. She wanted to see if she could make a man like you believe in a woman like her. And you did." My head spun. But why? What does she get out of it? Veronica laughed coldly. "A new identity, a reputation, a powerful name attached to hers. And when she was done with you, she'd burn you to the ground and move on, just like she always does." I felt sick. "She was part of Black Velvet," I said slowly. Veronica's smirk faded. "That name," she said carefully, isn't one you should be saying out loud. I exhaled sharply. I need to know what it means, who they are, why they're after me. She hesitated. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, "They're the kind of men who kill problems, Pastor. And right now you're a problem." As I left the bar, my mind raced. If what Veronica said was true, then Ruth's betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. She had set me up. The church scandal, the stolen donations, the rumors about my cheating, none of it was random. Ruth was dismantling my life step by step before disappearing into a new one. And worse, if she had ties to powerful men who wanted their secrets buried. I wasn't just being framed. I was being silenced. I needed to act fast, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be around to tell my side of the story. They say betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from someone you love. But what happens when that betrayal doesn't just break your heart? It destroys your life. That was the question I found myself asking as the cold steel of handcuffs tightened around my wrists. The flashing red and blue lights painted my front yard in eerie, pulsing colors. Officers swarmed the space, their hands hovering near their holsters as if I were some violent fugitive. "Pastor Daniel Evans," the lead officer announced, "you're under arrest for the murder of Senator Gregory Langley." My breath caught. Murder? I barely heard the rest of the words. Something about my rights, about staying silent. My mind was too busy reeling. I knew that name. Gregory Langley. A powerful senator with deep pockets and even deeper secrets. The kind of man who made things happen with a handshake and a threat. The kind of man who, as I was quickly learning, shouldn't have been tangled up with Ruth. Because now, he was dead. And apparently, I was the one who had killed him. At the station, they laid it out in front of me. The evidence, the accusations, the cold, inescapable truth that someone had orchestrated this perfectly. My fingerprints were found at the crime scene, on a whiskey glass, on the senator's desk. A surveillance camera had captured a blurred figure wearing a suit like mine entering Langley's hotel suite the night before. And the worst of it? Ruth had given a witness statement against me. "She claims you were angry with Langley," the detective said, barely masking his disgust. "That you found out about the affair and threatened him. That you said, and I quote, 'God may forgive you, but I never will.'" I shook my head, my pulse pounding. "That's a lie. I never even met him." The detective smirked and slid a photo across the table. "Then explain this." I forced myself to look. The picture was of me, standing beside Langley. It looked like a casual encounter, a handshake at some event, maybe a church fundraiser. But the way the angle was cropped, the way the lighting cast shadows over my face, it looked like something else, like an agreement, a deal, or worse, a conspiracy. I had spent years building my reputation, leading a congregation that trusted me, guiding people toward faith. And now, in the span of hours, it all collapsed. The news spread like wildfire. By the time I was transferred to my holding cell, my name was already being ripped apart in the media. Pastor accused of murder in high-profile scandal. Did a man of God let his jealousy lead to murder? The fall of Pastor Daniel Evans, a shocking betrayal of trust. I barely recognized my own reflection in the metal sink of the jail cell. How had it come to this? And then, just when I thought I had hit rock bottom, I heard the news that shattered whatever was left of my hope. The church had turned against me. A statement was issued by the elders, men I had prayed with, men I had trusted. Pastor Evans has been relieved of his duties indefinitely. Our hearts are with the victim's family, and we trust the legal system to bring justice. Just like that, I was abandoned, forgotten, exactly as Ruth had planned. I sat in that cell, staring at the cracked ceiling, my mind replaying every moment that had led me here. Ruth's confession, the stolen church funds, the whispers of black velvet. It wasn't about infidelity. It wasn't even about power. It was about erasing me, and she was doing it flawlessly. I wasn't sure how long I sat there before the guard's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "You got a call," he grunted. "Make it quick." I picked up the phone, my hands still trembling. A voice, low, urgent, and unfamiliar, came through the line. "Pastor Evans," the man said. "I know what she's doing." My breath caught. "Who is this?" I demanded. The man exhaled sharply. "Someone who knows how deep this goes. If you want the truth, meet me when you get out." Before I could say anything, the line went dead. I gripped the receiver, my mind racing. Who was he? How did he know Ruth? And most importantly, how was I going to get out of here before it was too late? I never thought I'd stand outside a dimly lit parking garage, waiting for a man whose name I didn't even know. But after everything I'd been through, arrest, betrayal, and the complete destruction of my reputation, it was one more risk. I pulled my coat tighter against the cold night air, my pulse steady but my mind racing. The call had been brief, cryptic. "If you want the truth, meet me when you get out." I had no other choice. A car pulled up. The headlights flickered once before shutting off. The driver's door opened, and a man in his late 40s stepped out, looking over his shoulder before approaching. "You Pastor Evans?" he asked, his voice low and rough, like a man who smoked too much and trusted too little. "I am. And you are?" "Call me Martin," he said, glancing around again before shoving his hands into his coat pockets. "I don't have much time, so listen closely. I used to be one of Ruth's clients." I stiffened. "She had a reputation, Pastor," Martin continued. "Not just for, but for playing the long game." I swallowed the disgust rising in my throat and forced myself to focus. "What do you mean?" "She doesn't just take money. She takes control. Ruth's been blackmailing powerful men for years, senators, businessmen, law enforcement. Once she gets close enough, she digs up dirt, records conversations, collects evidence. Anything she can use as leverage." I clenched my fists. "And me?" Martin let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "You? You were her golden ticket." I frowned. "She needed credibility, Pastor. A man of God. Someone so clean that no one would ever suspect her. She wanted to use your reputation as a shield while she kept running her game. But then," he gave me a pointed look, "you got too close. You started asking too many questions." A chill ran down my spine. "So she framed me." Martin nodded. "And it won't stop there. If you try to expose her, she'll make sure you never get the chance." I took a deep breath, my mind racing. "Do you have proof? Something that can clear my name?" He hesitated, then pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. "This has recordings, names, transactions, but it's not enough. You need more." I took the drive, gripping it tightly. "Then I'll get more." Martin gave me a look that almost resembled pity. "Be careful, Pastor. Ruth doesn't leave loose ends." That night, I barely slept. The weight of what I'd learned pressed down on me like a stone. I had spent years preaching about redemption, about forgiveness. I had given Ruth the benefit of the doubt, and she had used me, plotted against me. I knew I had to act fast. If I could gather enough evidence, I could take it to the authorities. But Ruth was always one step ahead. The knock on my door came just after midnight. I froze. Slowly, I made my way to the door, my heart pounding. When I opened it, there she was. Ruth. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with tears. She looked broken, vulnerable, the way she had when she first confessed her past to me. "Daniel," she whispered, "please." I had nowhere else to go. I stood motionless. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door in her face. But then she let out a quiet sob. "They used me," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I was in control, but I wasn't. They forced me into this, Daniel. I swear. I never wanted to hurt you." I clenched my jaw. "Who's they?" She hesitated. "Powerful men. Dangerous men." She stepped forward, lowering her voice. "I have proof, but they're watching me. I need your help." I studied her, my mind torn between reason and emotion. Could it be true? Could she have been a pawn in something bigger? Then, just as I was about to respond, something caught my eye. The faint glint of metal inside her purse. A gun. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The remorse, the tears, the desperate plea. This wasn't an apology. This was an execution. My blood ran cold. She wasn't here to make things right. She was here to silence me. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes locked on Ruth as my mind raced for a way out. She had always been a master manipulator, but this was different. This was the final move in a game I never realized I was playing. I took a slow step back, keeping my expression neutral. "Ruth," I said softly, "I believe you." Her lip trembled. "You do?" I nodded, letting my voice carry the weight of my conviction. "But we can't do this alone. If we work together, we can expose them. We can bring the real culprits to justice." For the briefest moment, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. That's when I knew. She hadn't expected this. She had come here prepared to kill a man who hated her, not one who still held out hope. She hesitated. I saw her fingers twitch near her purse. I had to act fast. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, turning it just enough for her to see that I had been recording everything. Her breath caught. "What?" "I was willing to forgive you once," I said, my voice unwavering, "but I won't let you destroy me." The mask dropped. Her expression twisted into something cold, something predatory. "You think this will save you?" she hissed. I took another step back. "It already has." At that moment, the sound of tires screeching outside shattered the silence. A loud pounding on the door followed. "Pastor Evans, this is the police. Open up." Panic flashed across Ruth's face. She turned to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The door burst open, and officers flooded in. Two of them tackled Ruth before she could reach her gun. She screamed, thrashing, but they were too strong. "Let me go. You don't know what you're doing." One of the officers looked at me. "Pastor, are you all right?" I exhaled, nodding. "I have everything recorded." I held up my phone, feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest. It was over, or so I thought. The next few weeks were a blur of legal battles, public apologies, and broken trust. With the evidence from Martin's flash drive, my own recording, and statements from other victims, Ruth was charged with multiple counts of fraud, blackmail, and conspiracy. The murder charge against me was dropped, and my name was cleared, but the damage had been done. Some church members returned. Others didn't. The whispers never fully faded. I had spent my entire life preaching about redemption, about God's mercy. But in the end, had I been too naive? Too willing to believe that even the most broken souls could change? That question haunted me as I stood in front of my congregation once more, delivering a sermon unlike any other. "Betrayal cuts deep," I told them. "Justice is necessary. But true redemption? It can't be forced. It can't be manipulated. It must be real." Some nodded. Others avoided my gaze. And yet, despite everything, I still believed. Maybe that made me a fool. Or maybe it made me a man of faith. That night, as I locked up my office, I found an envelope waiting for me on my desk. No return address. No name. Just a single sheet of paper inside. For words. "This isn't over yet." A chill ran down my spine. I looked around the empty church, feeling a presence I couldn't name. Was it Ruth? One of her allies? Or something far more dangerous? I didn't know. But I did know one thing. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales of betrayal, redemption, and suspense. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe in second chances, or was Daniel doomed from the start? Stay tuned for more thrilling stories, and remember, some endings are just the beginning. See you soon in our next story.